So that brings us sort of up to speed on what the WWE has disclosed, the shakeup in terms of power positions, where Vince McMahon stands, and then all focus becomes on a potential sale of this company. And this was all lots of speculation on Tuesday night. What we can say today is that a lot of outlets and reporters, including Brandon, that I am very confident in as well, is that no sale has occurred. That this company has not been sold yet, which would certainly line up with the fact that it was just days ago that we saw the report that they had hired JP Morgan to begin exploring sales talks, and the idea to pull off something this grand in such quick fashion would seem extremely difficult. But that's not to say that this is all trending in that direction. Whether a sale occurs, who it is sold to, that is all up for debate. But where do you stand right now, Brandon, when it comes to the sale? Because everything related to the stock is tied to this sale. That I think the last 24 hours has only sped up the demand for news on this subject, and maybe a little less leeway than we were talking about on Friday that this company has to execute such a sale. Like, is there going to be that patience with the stock?
Well, I think the timing is around the spring. They either renew the TV rights deal or they make some transaction with the company, and I think we know by then. And that's sort of they're not going to renew TV rights for Raw and SmackDown and then some time later make a company transaction. I don't believe that's how it's going to go. And Nick Khan in the meeting basically said words to that effect, that's they can't make a TV deal and then go make a company sale. So I think spring is roughly the time frame that I would expect one of those two things to happen. I watched Twitter unravel last night, and people speculate / maybe report that WWE was near a deal with Saudi Arabia, who I think is a plausible suitor to buy the company. They own Newcastle United. They're involved in funding the Live Golf, new golf league to compete with the PGA. But so I've asked someone who I think would know, and it was strongly denied to me that that is a thing that is anywhere near happening. I don't believe that there are any advanced negotiations between WWE and Saudi organizations for a company transaction, and I don't believe that there's any agreement in principle or anything like that between WWE and Saudi Arabia for the company to be taken private or to be bought. I think a transaction like that make a lot of sense for Vince McMahon and his situation and maybe what he wants. I could see him from his perspective viewing that as far as taking the company private, taking the company public, which he did in 1999, and being overseen by the SEC has, made this scandal more of a problem for him than it would be otherwise, particularly when we think about the financial aspect of this story and the fact that Vince McMahon used personal money to pay for NDAs to keep several women silent about the allegations against him. That should have been recorded as company expense because it was meant to protect the company. If WWE is a private company still, that particular issue, the financial issue, is probably not as big or maybe any issue for him. But anyway, I don't think a transaction between the Saudis and WWE is imminent or in any sort of advanced process at this point. Is it going to happen someday? Maybe. It is. There are dots to connect in terms of, when you look at the Saudi event deal that was made and that we're currently, WWE is currently under, that was made in 2018 to do 2 events a year, $100 million a year. That deal was made when George Barris and Michelle Wilson were the number 2 and number 3 executives in the company, and they're back on the board. So there's some dots to connect here, but I see no reason to believe that this is any more advanced than any other deal that WWE is making. And I think that they are exploring various possibilities, including a sale of the company and maybe a merger of the company if it's something smaller like Endeavor perhaps, or maybe taking it private or not doing anything and just continuing as they are as a public company controlled by Vince McMahon. And I don't know if Vince favors any of those outcomes more than others, and I don't know if certain executives favor any of those outcomes. So,
yeah, it does become, an increasing interesting question. I would say that if you are looking at the Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund of how much more difficult that becomes because you are still contingent on executing these television rights deals. And what is the appetite for these US broadcasters to be in business with a Saudi Arabian owned WWE as opposed to its current makeup, or being owned by an Endeavor, for instance? And that becomes a very tricky question when we have seen Live Golf, for a multitude of reasons, that it has had struggles when it comes to securing a television deal. Now WWE is, I would say, much more ingrained, and if you're looking at Comcast, very much tied to Raw on the USA Network, and it brings about a lot of questions. I always caution myself when it comes to just kind of getting around moral improprieties that get in the way of business. I think if you are somebody that holds that standard, you are going to be left empty, I think, at the end of it. So I look at that as not a question to dismiss, but one that is worth throwing out there, as opposed to a sale to some of these other candidates that we have seen, that it's just a different, I would say, level of comfort that some of these broadcasters would have being in business with, and what these programs would become. Like, what is this investment fund in Saudi Arabia? What are they buying? What are they expecting out of this when it comes to their projection to a worldwide audience?
If any of the potential suitors that have been thrown around, which are any of Comcast, Fox, Netflix, Amazon, Endeavor, Liberty Media, Redbird Capital, any of those, if any of them are going to have the least amount of a problem, I suppose, with Vince McMahon's moral improprieties, perhaps it's the Saudi government, because they have their own moral issues. So maybe they would be more open with that than others would. It would be less of a deterrent to a deal than it would be for, say, Comcast or for Disney, of all companies. So there's that issue. I could see it being attractive to the Saudi government in the sense that, hey, look, maybe we are having problems getting a TV deal for Live Golf, or organizations that may be associated with us may have trouble making certain business partnerships, particularly in the case of Live Golf. It's a new entity, right? But if we have something that's really established, that has all of these ingrained business partnerships already, it sort of gets them associated with the company that has all these relationships and becomes sort of more normal. I can see that being attractive, right? But we'll see what happens. And I guess the idea of whether WWE is going to be able to do TV deals, I think there's just all sorts of, there's like two layers, I guess, in that scenario. In that, is it going to be harder for WWE to make a TV deal? Let's say they're just going to renew rights. Is it going to be harder for WWE to make a TV deal with because of the fact that Vince is there? I don't have a great sense of that. And as time goes on, I'm leaning more towards no, that's not going to be a huge issue, at least not until there's other news stories, if there are any, around any wrongdoing that he may have done. Is it going to be a problem? You have that fact, that potential problem, combined with, let's say we have a WWE someday that is owned or funded by the Saudi government. We've got sort of two layers of problems here in terms of moral perception. I don't know, and it ultimately comes down to what the networks are willing to stomach, and an extension of that, maybe what the advertisers are willing to stomach, which I really don't know how to read. Wrestling, I believe, still has a perception problem in terms of having trouble being able to sell ad space. I think that has improved over the years somewhat, but it's still a problem. And does adding these moral problems on top of it really make it that much different? Maybe, maybe not, but I don't know, it's something to think about.